She walked quietly into the lecture hall, a simple woman in a gray cardigan. When the elite professor forced her to solve an impossible equation, everyone exchanged smirks. They were about to witness mathematics history, and the most satisfying comeuppance the university had ever seen. The lecture hall at Texas State University buzzed with anticipation as Professor Richard Harrington made his way to the podium. His reputation preceded him, a distinguished mathematician, department head, and notorious for his disdain toward anyone he deemed intellectually inferior. Sarah Mitchell slipped into the back row, smoothing her gray cardigan over a white blouse. At 37, she stood out among the graduate students, but she wasn't there to blend in. She was there to learn. Today's symposium will address Riemann's hypothesis and its implications for quantum computing, Harrington announced. His commanding voice silenced the room. His silver beard and tailored blue suit projected authority as his eyes scanned, the audience pausing briefly on Sarah. His mouth twitched with subtle disapproval. She'd seen that look before. The quick assessment, the dismissal. It was the same look she'd received when she applied for the university's maintenance staff position 3 years ago. Presentations from doctoral candidates began. Sarah took meticulous notes, her eyes lighting up during discussions of mathematical theory. When the floor opened for questions, her hand stayed down. Experience had taught her that people like her weren't expected to speak in rooms like this. During the break, she overheard 2 students whispering. "Who's the cleaning lady taking notes?" one snickered. "Probably just auditing for continuing ed credits," the other replied. Harrington hates when non-math people attend these things. Sarah gripped her notebook tighter but kept her composure. They didn't know that mathematics had been her companion since childhood, that she taught herself advanced calculus between night shifts, raising her daughter alone. They couldn't see the equations that danced behind her eyes when she closed them. As the symposium resumed, Harrington presented his controversial approach to an unsolved mathematical problem. His explanation was elegant, but subtly flawed. Sarah saw it instantly. She'd spent countless nights thinking about this very equation. "Any questions?" Harrington asked, expecting silence. The room remained still. Almost involuntarily, Sarah raised her hand, and instantly regretted it. Every head turned. Harrington's eyebrows lifted in mock surprise. "Yes, ma'am," he said, lacing his words with condescension. "I was wondering about the variable transformation in Step 4, Sarah said, her voice softer than intended. "Wouldn't that create inconsistencies with the boundary conditions?" The room went quiet. Students exchanged glances. Harrington's expression hardened. "Your name," he demanded. "Sarah Mitchell." "And your department?" "I work in facilities management." A ripple of whispers spread. Harrington's face twisted from surprise to amusement. "Facilities management," he repeated, letting it hang. "How interesting. And you believe you found an error in my work?" Sarah flushed. "Not an error exactly, just a potential complication that—" He cut her off. "Instead of questioning established mathematical principles, perhaps you should focus on more accessible pursuits." Laughter broke out. Sarah shrank into her seat, her face burning. She wished she had stayed quiet. What no one knew was that this moment of humiliation would become the beginning of something extraordinary. But Harrington wasn't finished. Having found an easy target, he pushed further. "Since our guest from facilities management has such confidence, perhaps she'd like to demonstrate her expertise." He gestured toward the chalkboard. "Come forward, Miss Mitchell." Sarah froze. Every instinct told her to decline, but something stronger, pride maybe, or the exhaustion of being underestimated, pushed her up. The walk to the front felt endless. Each step echoed. She took the chalk from his outstretched hand, avoiding eye contact. "Let's make this accessible," Harrington said, and wrote a complex differential equation on the board. Sarah recognized it instantly, a problem from advanced multivariate calculus. Difficult, yes, but not impossible. The real challenge wasn't solving it. It was doing so under a spotlight meant to humiliate. "Take your time," Harrington added mockingly. "We're all eager to learn from diverse perspectives." More laughter. Her hand trembled slightly as she stared at the equation. Behind her, someone whispered, "This is painful to watch." Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a visiting professor from MIT seated in the front row, frowned at Harrington's tone. She didn't speak, but she watched Sarah with growing curiosity. Sarah took a deep breath. The numbers and symbols on the board rearranged in her mind, falling into patterns she'd known since she was young. She hadn't studied formally beyond community college, but math had been her refuge. She raised the chalk and began to write. "Perhaps we should simplify—" Harrington started, but stopped as he saw her work. The room fell silent. She moved through the problem with quiet confidence. Her earlier nervousness melted away, replaced by calm clarity. She was no longer in a hostile room. She was in the realm where she belonged, where numbers obeyed rules and made sense. After 2 minutes of silence, she set down the chalk and stepped back. Harrington stared at the board, his smugness giving way to confusion. He scanned her work for errors, but there were none. The solution was not only correct, but elegant. "That's correct," he said reluctantly, though anyone with basic calculus training could have managed it. Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow, exchanging a look with a colleague. Harrington, however, wasn't done. He didn't expect her to concede defeat so easily, but the hope of it vanished as quickly as the previous equation from the board. "Let's try something more challenging," he said, the edge in his voice sharper now. "Something from my current research." He turned and wrote a new equation, something Sarah didn't recognize at all. This wasn't from any standard curriculum. It was advanced, bleeding-edge theoretical mathematics, the sort that only appears in specialized journals. "This problem has implications for quantum computing and encryption," Harrington said, addressing the room, though his eyes never left Sarah. "If you'd prefer to return to your seat, I would certainly understand." His challenge hovered in the air like a gauntlet, and the room held its collective breath, waiting for Sarah to retreat. Instead, she picked up the chalk again. She studied the equation, her earlier confidence slipping. This was something else. Complex, abstract, filled with unfamiliar notation her self-study hadn't prepared her for. Doubt crept in. Maybe she had overstepped. Maybe Harrington was right about her place. Silence pressed in as seconds ticked by. Some students leaned forward, curiosity or pity in their eyes. Others looked barely amused. "As I suspected," Harrington said, reaching for the chalk. "Perhaps we should continue with the symposium." "Wait," Sarah said quietly, pulling the chalk back. Something in the equation had shifted in her mind. A pattern emerged within the chaos of symbols. She remembered an article she'd read last month during a lunch break, hunched over a library computer. It had outlined a novel approach to quantum encryption. She began to write. Slowly at first, then with building momentum. The room's energy changed. Students exchanged confused looks. Harrington's smugness faltered. Dr. Chen sat forward, her eyes narrowing as she watched. Sarah wasn't just solving the problem. She was approaching it from an unexpected angle, one that revealed startling intuition. Partway through, Sarah paused, frowning. She'd hit a wall. The equation led nowhere. Harrington smiled, satisfied. "A valiant attempt," he said, reaching again. But Sarah didn't move. She stood still, eyes locked on the board, thoughts racing. Everything else faded. Then, suddenly, like a lock clicking open, she saw the way forward, an elegant transformation. To simplify the equation. She began writing again, the chalk gliding with growing confidence. The only sound in the room was the scratch of her movements. Gasps erupted from the front row where senior faculty sat. Dr. Chen whispered urgently to a colleague. Harrington's face drained of color. He wasn't watching with disdain anymore. Now it was alarm. What Sarah was doing shouldn't have been possible, not from someone without years of formal training. "That's not the standard approach," he snapped. Sarah didn't respond. She was locked into that quiet mental state that came when the world fell away and only the math remained. She wasn't just solving his problem, she was improving it, uncovering insights he hadn't seen. The room had shifted. Students who had laughed were now silent, their expressions transforming from ridicule to something closer to respect. The professors up front were murmuring among themselves. Harrington stood frozen in tension, torn between the instinct to maintain his dominance and a scholar's awe at what was unfolding. Sarah was nearly finished when Harrington stepped forward, examining the board. His finger traced the transformation she'd used. "This simplification," he said, voice strained. "Where did you learn it?" Sarah finally looked at him. "I didn't learn it," she said. "I just saw it." Their eyes met, teacher and janitor, intellects unexpectedly converging in this moment shaped by chalk and raw insight. But before he could answer, Dr. Chen rose from her seat. "That's the Luo Takahashi method," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "It was only published last month in the International Journal of Quantum Mathematics." She stared at Sarah. "How could you possibly know about it?" All eyes turned to Sarah. She looked down at the chalk in her hand, suddenly feeling the weight of this moment. She had kept her talent quiet for so long, convinced no one would believe her. Just a single mom, working maintenance. But now she had a choice. "I didn't know it had a name," she said, her voice steadying. "I've never had formal training, just a few classes at community college." "Impossible," Harrington muttered, though he no longer sounded sure. "These concepts take years." Dr. Chen stepped closer to the board. "And yet, here they are, executed perfectly." She turned back to Sarah. "How?" Sarah inhaled slowly, letting the silence settle around her. She thought of her daughter, Lily, who was picking up extra shifts to save for college. Lily, who had watched her mother stay small, unseen. "Math has always made sense to me," Sarah said simply. "When I look at equations, I see the connections. If I stare at them long enough, they open up." A student near the front spoke hesitantly. "But you work in maintenance. Why aren't you—" "Because life happens," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying more steel now. "I had my daughter young. Her father left. I needed a job with benefits. This," she gestured at the board, "this doesn't keep a roof over your head. Or pay for your kids' braces." The truth of it settled over the room, silencing even the whispers. Harrington looked genuinely puzzled now. "Then why are you here? Why attend this symposium?" Sarah met his gaze. "Because I love mathematics. Because life doesn't stop you from learning, unless you let it." She turned back to the board. The unfinished equation waited, just like the moment before her. Trajectory of her life was at a crossroads. She could stop now, return to her seat, go back to her predictable existence. Or she could finish what she started and fully reveal the mind she'd kept hidden for so long. Sarah lifted the chalk and turned to face the problem once more. Her hand no longer trembled. "I'm going to finish this," she said, more to herself than to the room full of academics. And with that simple declaration, Sarah Mitchell stepped into her power, ready to show these elite mathematical minds exactly what a simple woman from facilities management could do. She turned back to the board, chalk poised. The room fell completely, silent, a hush so profound that the scratch of chalk against the blackboard echoed like thunder. Her mind cleared as she re-entered the world of pure mathematics, where social hierarchies and academic credentials meant nothing against the absolute democracy of correct answers. She worked through the remainder of the problem with fluid grace, her hand moving confidently across the board. When faced with a particularly thorny section, She paused, tilted her head slightly, then took an unexpected approach, creating a substitution that simplified the entire equation. Dr. Chen gasped audibly. "She's using dimensional analysis to collapse the quantum variance," she whispered to her colleague. "I've never seen anyone approach it that way." Harrington stood rigid, his expression unreadable as Sarah's solution unfolded. It wasn't just correct, it was innovative, elegant, the kind of mathematical thinking that transcended mere calculation. When Sarah placed the final value in a neat box and stepped back, no one spoke. The solution glowed on the blackboard, like a revelation. She hadn't just solved Harrington's challenge, she had improved upon it, finding efficiencies that hadn't been published in any journal. Dr. Chen was the first to break the silence. "That's remarkable," she said, approaching the board. "You've collapsed 3 steps into one with this transformation." She turned to the room. "This isn't just correct, it's brilliant." A murmur spread through the audience. Students who had snickered earlier now looked at Sarah with undisguised awe. Several professors had pulled out their phones, discreetly, photographing her work. Harrington cleared his throat. "While unconventional, I suppose the approach has merit," he conceded reluctantly. The words seemed painful for him to speak. "Merit?" Dr. Chen challenged, turning to him with raised eyebrows. "Richard, this solution could advance our understanding of quantum encryption mathematics. This is publishable work." Sarah stood quietly, chalk dust coating her fingers, feeling strangely detached from the commotion beginning to stir around her. This hadn't been about proving anyone wrong. She'd simply answered the challenge before her as best she could. "Ms. Mitchell," Dr. Chen said, turning to her directly, "have you documented any of your other mathematical insights?" Sarah hesitated. "I have notebooks, just things I work on at night when I can't sleep." "Notebooks?" Harrington repeated, his professional curiosity finally overtaking his pride. "What kind of mathematics do you explore?" "Different things," Sarah replied, suddenly self-conscious again. "Number theory, mostly. Some work on prime factorization algorithms." Dr. Chen and Harrington exchanged startled glances. Prime factorization was at the heart of cryptography research, one of the most sophisticated areas of applied mathematics. "I'd like to see these notebooks," Dr. Chen said firmly. A student from the front row stood up. "That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen," he declared and began to applaud. Others joined in, the sound building until it filled the lecture hall. Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, rather than shame this time. The applause wasn't something she had sought or expected. As the clapping continued, she caught the eye of a young woman in the back row, a student who had been watching intently throughout the entire demonstration. The young woman nodded at her, with profound respect as if witnessing something life-changing. In that moment, Sarah realized her actions hadn't just been about mathematics. She had become visible, truly visible for the first time in her adult life. Her knowledge, her mind, her potential had stepped out of the shadows into the light. The applause eventually subsided, but something had fundamentally changed in that lecture hall. Not just for Sarah, but for everyone who had witnessed her transformation from invisible to extraordinary. The symposium had officially disbanded an hour ago, but the lecture hall remained crowded. Sarah found herself surrounded by professors and graduate students, all asking questions about her mathematical insights. Dr. Chen hadn't left her side, almost protective in her presence. "Your intuitive grasp of multidimensional analysis is extraordinary," a quantum computing professor told her. "Have you ever considered formal study?" Sarah gave a sad smile. "Consider it? Yes. Afford it? No." Across the room, Professor Harrington was engaged in intense conversation with the department dean. His gestures were animated, occasionally pointing in Sarah's direction. His earlier condescension had morphed into something more complex, a reluctant professional respect tinged with defensiveness. Dr. Chen touched Sarah's arm gently. "We should talk about your future," she said quietly. "MIT has fellowship programs designed for exceptional cases like yours." Sarah looked at her startled. "MIT? Me? Talent like yours doesn't come along often," Dr. Chen Mai replied. "It would be mathematical malpractice to let it go unnurtured." The crowd around Sarah parted as Professor Harrington approached. His silver beard seemed to quiver slightly with suppressed emotion. "Mitchell," he said formally, "the department wanted to review her notebooks, if she was willing. There might be opportunities to discuss." His words were measured, careful. It wasn't quite an apology, but from a man like Harrington, it was the closest thing to one. Sarah nodded. "I'll bring them tomorrow." "I'll be reviewing them personally," Dr. Chen interjected, giving Harrington a pointed look that made his mouth tighten. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah gathered her things. Her phone showed 5 missed calls from the babysitter. Real life was calling again, a stark reminder of the practical limits that had always constrained her mathematical pursuits. Walking toward the exit, she was stopped by a young woman. "Miss Mitchell," the student said hesitantly. "I'm studying engineering, and I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" Sarah asked. "For showing that where you start doesn't determine what you know." The student's eyes were bright with emotion. "I'm a first-generation college student from a rural town. People make assumptions about me, too." Sarah felt something warm unfold in her chest. She hadn't considered how her moment might ripple out to others. Outside, the evening air felt different, charged with possibility. She took a deep breath, thinking of the notebooks at home, filled with years of solitary mathematical exploration. Tomorrow, those private thoughts would be examined by some of the country's top minds. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. For the first time in years, Sarah Mitchell allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where her mind, not her uniform, defined her. 6 months later, she stood in front of a different classroom, smaller this time, with eager undergraduate faces watching her explain a complex theorem. The sleeves of her gray cardigan were pushed up as she wrote across the whiteboard. No longer hesitant or apologetic about claiming space, her life had transformed with breathtaking speed. After that symposium, Dr. Chen had arranged an emergency fellowship, recognizing that talent like Sarah's couldn't wait for traditional timelines. 2 of her theoretical approaches had already been published, her name listed as primary author. Harrington had come around too, eventually, though it had taken time and several departmental meetings where he was outvoted. Now, he grudgingly acknowledged her insights, especially after her work on quantum encryption drew attention from research institutions across the country. But the biggest change was internal. Sarah no longer hid her intelligence or passion. She spoke with authority, knowing her value didn't come from credentials but from the power of her mind. Her daughter Lily had transferred to the university, on a full scholarship, inspired by her mother's example to pursue her dreams without apology. As Sarah finished her explanation, a student raised her hand. A young woman, uncertain but determined. Sarah called on her immediately, remembering what it felt like to be unseen. "Never be afraid to raise your hand," she told them. "The question you're afraid to ask might change everything, not just for you, but for everyone in the room." If Sarah's journey from overlooked to extraordinary touched your heart, remember that genius often exists in unexpected places, hidden, not by lack of ability, but by circumstance. Who might you be underestimating in your own life? We'd love to hear your stories of hidden talents discovered. Where are you watching from today? Share in the comments. If you enjoyed this story of recognition and transformation, subscribe for more glimpses of extraordinary moments that change lives. Sometimes the greatest minds aren't found in lecture halls, but cleaning them. Like, share, and join our community of storytellers celebrating unsung heroes everywhere.